Hey everybody, this is Chris Alvey. You might know me better as Mosquito. Today I'm going to be going over cutting tongue and groove with the Stanley number 45. What I will be using is obviously my number 45, the tongue and groove iron, and my 1/4 inch plow iron. Okay, so these are the two irons that you're going to need, the tongue and the groove. This is the 1/4 inch tongue and groove iron. They did make an iron with 3/16 gap in the middle here, but that was technically considered an optional cutter. I think one of the type studies I read says that it was introduced around 1914, so just make sure whichever tongue iron you use, you match that with the corresponding plowing iron. In this case it's 1/4 inch. Just a quick note about the tongue iron. This here is your depth stop. The depth stops on the number 45 won't work with this iron because it's cutting on the edges, and both depth stops only register on the edge. So this is where you'll get your depth. How you set it is you just take a screwdriver and loosen this screw, and then you can slide this up and down however you like. One thing to note though, this distance here is not going to be your depth because the iron does not cut straight vertical. When it's in the plane, it's actually angled, so the distance will be the distance from this edge to this bevel. I usually leave it set all the way down just because that's my preference. I don't think it really matters for the purposes of demonstration, but I'm just going to leave it there. Now here I'm going to show you how I set up for tongue and groove with my 45. I don't need the groove yet, since I usually start with the tongue. Reason being because then I can set the depth for the groove based off of the tongue, which I will show you later. Since I like to use the short rods so I don't catch the long rods on myself or my bench, I will remove this fence because it makes it rather difficult to insert the iron if it's on. Then loosen up the screws that hold this sliding body on. Move those apart. Put the iron in. One thing to note is that there is a minimum depth that you'll have to have set, because I'll show you here. If I have the depth stop set, the depth adjustment set too shallow, I can't get the iron in because it flares out here down at the bottom, and so it can't go too high or you'll hit the main casting up here. So just keep that in mind. The first time I tried doing this, I had the depth adjustment set way too shallow and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get it up there, and later I felt like an idiot, and that was why. Alright, so now that we have that set in there deep enough, go ahead and tighten this down just a little to hold it in, but still be able to adjust the depth. And then you want to slide this skate in, and then I have it set so it right when it touches it, I back it out just a hair. And the reason I back it out just a little bit is so that way I don't have to worry about it hitting the iron when I'm trying to adjust the depth. Alright, so now I'm just going to sight down here, make sure I have my depth set well, not too deep, not too shallow. It'll be similar to setting up for a groove in terms of depth of cut. I usually prefer shallow because I'm really not taking off that much material, and then depending on what kind of grain you end up with, you might want to adjust that shallower or deeper. Now would be a good time, if you have wax or oil or whatever you use, to go ahead and do that now. Why? You don't really need it on this cut, but I often tend to forget, so I usually do it whenever I think about it. Another thing is, don't forget the fence. I'm just using paraffin wax or a candle. I guess I haven't really experimented too much, but it seems to work for me. And now you'll want to put the fence back on using these upper holes here, so these two up here, because we have to be able to clear this and get underneath it. And you can go ahead and tighten these down until they just touch and then back them off, because we will have to set that up later, which I will show in a second. Alright, so for setting the fence, for cutting the tongue, here's our scrap piece of wood here. I have it marked out, and I just kind of drew that in with pencil so it'd be easier to see. And You just kind of set the plane on top of it, line it up as best you can, slide the fence in, and then just sort of wiggle it until you're happy with your alignment. And then lock it in place. Alright, so once you've set this up, you can go ahead and cut your test piece if you like, which is what I did just in case. And now, you can get onto the workpiece. So, similar to cutting the groove, you're going to want to start at the far end just to make it a little bit easier, and then just slowly work your way back. One thing that you'll probably want to do, which is just kind of good practice for your cutters, is once you get to the end, lift up on the heel, so you'll drag back on the front part of the skate before you push again. This will help reduce any wear from pulling it over backwards on the bevel. And as opposed to picking it up and starting over, it'll just keep you in line and a whole lot faster. As you can see, I'm taking a very fine cut, and I could probably set it a little bit deeper, but on my test piece I was getting a little bit of tear out because I was kind of fighting the grain, but it doesn't look like it's a problem on this one, so I'm sure I'm safe to set it a little bit deeper, but in all honesty, it doesn't really matter, and I enjoy planing. Just like plowing a groove, as you can hear, there is no more cutting noise. That means that we've hit this depth stop here, and now we're done. Time to move over to the groove. Alright, here I've switched it over to cutting a groove. I haven't set it up yet, but I didn't feel I needed to go over that since I kind of covered that already in the previous video. This is the point where if you haven't already waxed or oiled these skates, you'll probably want to, because it'll make this part a lot easier. And I'm actually going to go ahead and re-wax the fence a little bit just in case. Probably doesn't need it, but it's not going to hurt me any. So, on this one you can go ahead and set it back for the lower two holes on the fence this time. For now, the distance for that doesn't actually matter, because what I'm going to do is go ahead and set the depth stop. And for setting the depth for the groove, what I do is I take this and I rest it on the very edge here, on the shoulder, and then I loosen this, and I just drop this depth gauge, or depth stop, all the way down until I hit the tongue, which is right there, and just when it starts to lift just a little bit, feel it hit, back it off just a touch, tighten it down, and then what you want to do is move the fence out so it's not in your way. Set the plane body on it, on the tongue that is. Set the groove iron, plow iron, to be just up to the edge of the tongue. Slide the fence over, tighten it down, and you're good to go. Obviously, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go over and cut a new practice piece and make a groove, see if it fits well. If not, come back, adjust, so forth. Alright, and at this point, once you've got the groove cutting set up, you can go ahead and cut through your test piece, which I already did over here, and I test fitted up against my workpiece, and I was happy with that. So I'm going to go forward with my actual workpiece here. So just like in the previous video, which I'm not really going to try and rehash, you again start at the end and work your way back. now that we have our groove cut, you can take your other workpiece that you've cut the tongue on already, test fit that. It is important that you make sure to have the fence on the same side of the workpiece. So I just kind of use these reference lines so I would know which side I had the fence on to make sure I wouldn't accidentally screw up. Because although the tongue would fit, as you can see here, the alignment is definitely off on that side, whereas on this side, not perfectly flush, but it is pretty close. But now, as you can see, I have pushed this as far down as it'll go, and there is just the fingernail's width gap, a little bit less. Can't quite fit my fingernail in there, but that's exactly what I was going for. Remember back when I said to set the depth stop on this till it just hit and then back it off just a hair? Well, this is why, because this is just kind of the way I prefer to do it, is I'll throw this back in the vise now, and I'll just cut the tongue down with a block plane till it's just perfectly flush. And I just like to keep test fitting along the way because it never hurts. It's just about there. And there you have it, tongue and groove with the number 45.